welcome to this video. In this video, we're really going to discuss the foundation of this course in many ways, which is the observation of the moon in relation to time. We're talking about the 13 moon calendar. But in order to get there, I think it's wise to discuss how we ended up here with the calendar that we have today, the modern calendar. So really you have to go back to the Romans and the way that they used to use time was to actually follow the moon. But they had a 10-month calendar. So what happened is that they actually started the month with Mars. Mars, of course, is the initiator. And this is where we get the word March. March is very much all to do with the springing forth of new life and, of course, the new year. Following on from March, Mars, right, you have April, Aprilis, the goddess. Then Maya or Maya, again, another goddess. And then you come into Juno for June, okay? So it's all sounding very familiar. Then now, of course, these days you get July and August, but in those days, this was the 5th and 6th month because it started at March, which was Quintilis and Sextilis, okay? 5 and 6. But then later on, Quintilis was replaced in honor of Julius Caesar. Julius is where we get the word July. And then Augustus, the Roman Emperor Augustus, replaced Sextilis. And this is where we get the word August from Augustus, okay? So this is how we end up with a situation where you have September, October, November, and December, which actually means 7, 8, 9, 10, yeah? Septem, Octo, Novem, Decem is 7, 8, 9, and 10 in Latin, the language spoken by the Romans. So December should be the 10th month. However, what happened is that 2 more months were added later on because actually they didn't have any months in January or February. So they didn't essentially map out the time during the winter months. They weren't interested in that for whatever reason. So later on, Julius Caesar himself came up with the Julian calendar, which started to follow the moon closer to conjunction with the whole of the solar year, the 365-day year, and he introduced 2 more months, January and February. Okay, so this is how we end up with 12 months. 12 moons, essentially, in a solar year, but it's not really following the moon very closely at all. And then this is tweaked a little bit later, well, quite a lot later actually, because Julius Caesar was around at the beginning of the last millennium, you know, in the Roman times. So this carried on for a long time, the Julian calendar, all the way up into the 1500s, where Pope tweaked it a little bit and replaced it with the Gregorian calendar. And that's very much the calendar that we have today. In around 1752, we finally adopted it here in Britain, and then of course transposed that out into the countries that we had influence over during the British Empire. Of course, to this day, time is very much still at Greenwich Mean Time, Ground Zero, named after Greenwich here in London. Okay, so we have the ancient calendar of the 10 months, followed by the Julian calendar, adding another 2 months, 12 months, and then that's tweaked a bit to the Gregorian calendar. So that's how we've ended up with the situation today. But none of this is really following the moon that closely at all. So really, when you go back to the 10-day calendar, the 10-month calendar, really that was at least following the new moon is when it really started. So really, we should be following each moon should be the month. So what's happened is a chap called Dr. Jose Gillis, he's no longer with us, he died in about 2011, he came up of this concept of following a 13 moon calendar, 13 months, 13 moons within a 360 day solar year, whereby each month, each moon would be 28 days. And 28 days fits exactly into 365 days with just one day left. And that was called a day out of time. So each month, therefore, has exactly the same amount of days, 28, and then that fits really nicely in with our 7-day week, where you have 7, that goes into 28 4 times, to follow the waxing and waning of the moon, from the new moon to the half moon, to the full moon, to the half moon, to the new moon, 4 7-day weeks within a 28-day period, and then one day at a time. So he talked about this being a return to natural time. He says this was what was done in the times of the Maya, and he said time is really art, where he says when you have this situation where we've had for a long time since Roman times, despite all the variations, each month being a separate length, he says this really does something to the mind where it brings us into disharmony, and he believes brings us into a more mechanistic way of thinking and a more mechanistic way of behaving. And he says when you actually fix the months into 28 days, you create a harmony, and the mind therefore responds to come into harmonic convergence as well. So how did he end up with the 28 days? Well, 28 is the mean average between the sidereal and the synodic cycles of the moon. The sidereal cycle of the moon is 27.1 days, and that is the full revolution, the full rotation that the moon takes to move all the way around the Earth, okay? Whereas the time that we take to see the new moon to the new moon again is actually a little bit longer, which is 29.5 days. That's the synodic cycle. So the mean average between these two cycles is 28 days. So that's how he ended up with 28 days. So if you're interested in finding out more of that, you can check out the foundation of the law of time, which he set up. However, there's also the goddess calendar, which is more what I use, which is using the 28-day 13 moon calendar with these 7-day weeks, but also honoring the sun as well in terms of the 8 points that are significant in relation to us here on Earth, which is, of course, the equinoxes, the 2 equinoxes, which is the time when the day and the night are of equal length, and the 2 solstices, the winter solstice, the shortest day, and the summer solstice, we're coming up to that now at the time of making this video, the longest day, and all the points exactly in between, which are known as the cross-quarter points. Halloween being one of the most famous, and May Day. They are known respectively as Samhain and Beltane, okay? So that's really all I want to go into here, to talk about a different relationship with time. And what happens is that it brings us out of the 12-month year. We see this number 12 an awful lot. There are 12 apostles, disciples of Jesus. There are 12 knights of the round table. There are 12 signs of the zodiac. But it is believed by some that this number 12 really puts us into a state of order, and order brings control by the hierarchy, the powers that be, and nothing really changes. It's something that preserves the status quo. Whereas the number 13 is far more mystical, and rather than just being an unchanged cycle of rotation, it invites the spiral of creation. Of course, everything is really in a spiral from the tiny little ammonite to the Milky Way itself. Everything is always moving, but also going forward. So if we really want to evolve and allow our consciousness to evolve in conjunction with the help of the moon, and the moon does have an effect on elevating our consciousness when we pay attention to it, then it is wise to go with this number 13 and follow the 13 moon calendar. And 13 has always been a little bit of a mystical number, a little bit of people a little bit afraid of Friday the 13th, for example. Well, for good reason, because they destroyed the Templars on Friday the 13th, who were a very interesting sect that certainly had a lot of the ancient Gnostic wisdom. But also there's often, you know, people won't have a 13th floor on a hotel, or they won't have a 13 in a hotel, that particular room. They just go from 12 to 14. So there's been this fear for a long time of 13, but perhaps that's because there's been a fear of the spiral. There's been a fear of the force of creation, which I call the Kundalini Shakti. Maybe there's been a fear of that which we don't understand, which lurks in the unconscious. Maybe there's been a fear for a long time of the goddess, of the divine feminine. And so, you know, we all stand here, as I do, as a return to the goddess, a return to the moon, a return to the earth, a return to the divine feminine, as well as, of course, a return to the divine masculine, as opposed to the immature masculine. So we've had a situation where we've had a suppressed, mature masculine and feminine, and so we really want to return to a balance of the divine feminine and the divine masculine as well. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Thanks very much for watching this video. It's a really important one to understand, and I'll see you in the next video.